that had never known defeat. For 2,000 years, their empire stretched across the stars like a dark stain, swallowing world after world. They were perfect warriors. Their bodies stood 8 feet tall, covered in scales harder than steel. Their claws could tear through metal. Their eyes could see in complete darkness. Evolution had made them into weapons, and they had used that gift well. 300 star systems belonged to them now. 300 conquered species served them as slaves. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They simply took what they wanted, and no one in the galaxy had ever stopped them. Overlord stood on the bridge of his command ship, the Endless Conquest, and watched the blue planet grow larger on the. His scales were darker than most, almost black, a sign of his ancient bloodline. He had personally led the conquest of 47 worlds. This small planet would be his 48th. "What do we know about them?" he asked his science officer. "They call themselves humans, Overlord, carbon-based life forms. Average height of less than 2 meters. No natural armor, no claws, no venom. Their bodies are remarkably fragile. A single plasma bolt would kill them instantly." Made a sound of amusement. "And their technology?" "Primitive. They have only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. Their weapons are crude. Their ships are slow. They have a small military presence in orbit, but nothing that could challenge even our smallest warship." "Then this will be quick," said. He felt almost disappointed. He had hoped for a challenge, but these humans seemed like prey animals, soft, weak, helpless. Far below, on the blue planet called Earth, Captain Park sat in the command center of Orbital Defense Station 7. He was a tall man by human standards, with broad shoulders and a calm face that never showed fear. He had served in the Korean Space Force for 15 years, and he had trained his whole life for a moment like this. But nothing could have prepared him for what he saw on his screens. The alien fleet filled the sky. Hundreds of ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They blocked out the stars like a wall of shadow. Park counted them carefully, his hands steady even as his heart raced. 200 warships, 50 troop carriers, one massive command vessel at the center, bigger than a city. "Sir," his communications officer said, her voice shaking, "we're receiving a transmission." "Put it through." The screen flickered and Park saw his first. The creature was terrifying. Its scales gleamed like polished obsidian. Its eyes were yellow, with vertical pupils like a snake. When it spoke, its voice was deep and cold, translated by some unknown technology into perfect Korean. "I am Overlord of the Dominion. Your planet has been selected for conquest. You will surrender all military assets, all industrial capabilities, and all governmental authority to us within 1 solar cycle. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your largest population center. This is not a negotiation. This is your only warning." The transmission ended. The command center was silent. Park could feel the fear in the room, thick and heavy like smoke. His officers looked at him, waiting for orders. Some of them were crying. Others were praying. They all knew what those ships could do. Park thought about his family. His wife was in with their 2 daughters. His parents were in Seoul, the city the aliens would destroy first if humanity resisted. He thought about the billions of people below, going about their lives, not knowing that everything was about to change. He could surrender. It would be the logical choice, the safe choice. They were clearly more powerful. Fighting them would mean death for millions, perhaps billions. A smart leader would accept defeat and hope for mercy. But Park remembered something his grandfather had told him many years ago. His grandfather had fought in a war long before Park was born. He had faced an enemy with better weapons, better training, and more soldiers. Everyone had told him to surrender too. "A man who surrenders without fighting," his grandfather had said, "has already lost everything. But a man who fights, even when he cannot win, keeps something that can never be taken from him." Park stood up straight. He pressed the transmit button. "This is Captain Park of the Korean Space Force speaking on behalf of humanity. We have received your demands." He paused, making sure his voice was steady and clear. "The answer is no." He released the button and sat back down. His communications officer stared at him. "Sir, that's all. That's all they need to hear." On the endless conquest, Overlord received the human's response. He played it 3 times, certain there was some mistake. The translation software must be broken. No species had ever simply refused before. They begged, they negotiated, they offered tribute, they asked for time, but they never just said no. "Is this some kind of trick?" he asked his officers. "We do not believe so, Overlord." The human appeared to be a military officer. His response seems to be genuine. Studied the image of Captain Park, frozen on his screen. The human was so small, so fragile. He had no scales, no claws, no natural weapons at all. His skin was soft and easily damaged. His bones would break under the slightest pressure. He was, by every measure, completely helpless against power. And yet he had refused to surrender. Felt something strange stir in his mind. It was not anger. He was too experienced for anger. It was curiosity. In 2,000 years of conquest, he had never encountered a species stupid enough to resist when resistance was clearly hopeless. What did these humans know that he did not? "Scan them again," he ordered. "All of them, every human on that planet. I want to know what makes them think they can fight us." His science officer worked for several minutes, then turned back with a confused expression. "Overlord, there is nothing. They are exactly what they appear to be. Soft, weak, short-lived creatures with primitive technology. They have no secret weapons, no hidden defenses, no allies coming to help them." Then why did they refuse? The science officer had no answer. Stared at the blue planet for a long time. In his 2,000 years of conquest, they had learned one important truth. Every species had a breaking point. Every species would surrender when the pain became too great. It was simply a matter of finding that point and applying pressure. "Prepare the fleet," he said finally. "We will show them what happens to those who refuse the dominion." As the fleet moved into attack formation, Captain Park watched from his station. He knew what was coming. He knew that many people would die. He knew that he might be one of them. But he also knew something else, something they did not understand and could not measure with their scanners. Humans had been fighting impossible battles since the beginning of their history. They had faced ice ages, plagues, famines, and countless wars against each other. They had been knocked down 1,000 times, and 1,000 times they had gotten back up. It was not strength that made them dangerous. It was something else, something deeper. They simply did not know how to give up. Park picked up his communicator and began giving orders. The battle for Earth was about to begin. They fell from the sky like burning stars. They came down over Seoul, casting shadows across the ancient city. The sound of their engines shook windows and set off car alarms for miles around. People ran screaming through the streets, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do. Overlord watched from orbit with satisfaction. This was how it always began. Terror first, then submission. He had seen it 300 times before. The first warriors stepped onto Earth's soil at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon. They were massive, terrifying creatures in black armor that made them look even larger. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy. They marched through the empty streets of Seoul's business district, scanning for targets. There were none. The humans had fled. "Cowards," one of the warriors growled. "They run like prey animals." But not all humans had run. Beneath the streets, in the vast network of subway tunnels that ran under Seoul like veins under skin, Lieutenant was waiting. She was 28 years old, small even by human standards, with short black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had joined the army because her father had been a soldier, and his father before him. Fighting was in her blood. Around her, crouched in the darkness, were 200 soldiers and more than 1,000 civilians who had refused to leave. Old men and young women, students and shopkeepers, people who had never held a weapon in their lives, now carrying rifles and grenades. "They're entering the station," whispered Private, watching his scanner. He was barely 20 with a face too young for war. 12 of them. Nodded. 12. Against 200 trained soldiers and 1,000 angry civilians, in a maze of tunnels that the aliens did not know. "Let them come," she said. The patrol moved into the subway system with confidence. Their thermal scanners showed heat signatures ahead, humans hiding like rats in holes. The patrol leader made a gesture, and his warriors spread out, advancing into the darkness. They did not understand what they were walking into. The first trap was simple. A wire stretched across the tunnel floor, connected to a stack of explosives. When the lead warrior hit the wire, the explosion collapsed the tunnel behind the patrol, cutting off their retreat. They were too tough to be killed by such a simple bomb, but that was not the point. The point was to trap them. "What is this?" the patrol leader shouted into his communicator. "We need support at station. There are explosives." His message was cut off when the lights went out. Not just the subway lights, all lights. The humans had cut the power to the entire district. They had thermal vision. They could see in the dark. But so could their enemies, thanks to the night vision goggles that every soldier wore. And the humans knew these tunnels like they knew their own homes. The attack came from everywhere at once. Gunfire from ahead, explosives from the sides, screaming civilians throwing homemade bombs from above. They were faster and stronger, but they were also confused, blind to the layout of this underground maze, unable to tell which direction the attacks were coming from. One by one they fell. The last warrior died with a Korean grandmother's knife in his neck. She was 73 years old, and she had lost her husband to an alien plasma bolt 30 minutes earlier. She had picked up his kitchen knife and waited for her chance. Overlord received the report 20 minutes later. He read it 3 times, certain there was an error. 12 warriors, he said slowly. 12 of my elite soldiers, killed by humans in a hole in the ground. Yes, Overlord. How is this possible? His officers had no answer. They had conquered species with far better technology, far stronger bodies, far more advanced weapons. But those species had fought in ways they understood: open battle, direct confrontation, strength against strength. These humans did not fight that way. They hid. They set traps. They used their weakness as a weapon, drawing them into places where strength did not matter. It was not honorable, it was not proper, but it was effective. "Send more troops," ordered. 500 warriors clear those tunnels. But the tunnels were long and dark, and the humans knew them well. For every tunnel they cleared, the humans found 3 more. For every patrol they sent, some did not return. The warriors were dying in 1s and 2s, killed by enemies they never saw, in battles that were over before they began. Above ground, the story was the same. Lieutenant had trained her people well. They never fought directly. They hit supply lines and communication centers. They destroyed on the ground. They poisoned water sources and collapsed buildings. They fought dirty because dirty fighting was the only kind they could win. And they were everywhere. Private, the young soldier with the innocent face, became famous for a single act of incredible courage. He had strapped explosives to his body, walked into a command post, and detonated them when the enemy officers gathered for a meeting. 7 high-ranking died that day. His name became a rallying cry. An old woman named Bora Shin organized a network of children to carry messages through the city. The ignored children, they were too small to be threats, but those children carried information that let the resistance strike at exactly the right time, in exactly the right place. A middle school teacher named figured out how to jam communications using equipment salvaged from a destroyed electronics store. For 3 days, The aliens could not coordinate their attacks, and the humans used that time to evacuate thousands of civilians. Small acts, ordinary people, but together they were bleeding the army drop by drop. Overlord studied the reports from Seoul with growing frustration. He had expected this conquest to take days. It had been 3 weeks, and his forces still did not control the city. His warriors were dying in numbers that should have been impossible against such weak enemies. "They are not fighting like a proper military," his tactical officer said. "They use civilians as soldiers. They attack without warning. They do not hold territory. They simply kill our warriors and disappear." "Then we will kill their civilians," said. "We will burn their city to the ground." "Overlord, we have tried, but every time we advance, they fall back. Every time we destroy a building, they simply move to another. They have turned the entire city into a trap." Stared at the tactical display. He was starting to understand something about these humans. They did not fight to win battles. They did not care about territory or honor or any of the things that mattered to the. They fought simply to hurt their enemies. And they were very, very good at it. In the tunnels beneath Seoul, Lieutenant sat with her back against a cold wall, cleaning her rifle. She had not slept in 4 days. She had lost half her soldiers. Her body ached and her hands would not stop shaking. But they had killed 87 warriors. 87 of the galaxy's most feared soldiers, dead at the hands of humans who refused to surrender. It was not victory, not yet, but it was something. A young soldier approached her, a girl named who had been a university student before the invasion. "Lieutenant, what do we do now?" Looked at her rifle. It was dirty and damaged, held together with tape and wire, like everything else they had. "We keep fighting," she said. "We make them pay for every inch of our home. We show them that humans are not prey." Nodded and went back to her position. Closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she saw something that made her smile, a message painted on the tunnel wall by someone she would never meet. It said they came to conquer, they found a war. Above them, they were learning a lesson that would change the galaxy forever. Strength was not everything. Power could be resisted, and the small, soft, fragile humans were far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. 3 months had passed since the invasion began. The aliens had learned their lesson about fighting humans in cities. Now they had changed their strategy. They would simply wait. Their ships formed a wall around Earth, blocking all supply lines from the human colonies on Mars and the Moon. Nothing could enter. Nothing could leave. They had done this before to species far stronger than humans. Starvation always worked. Hunger broke what weapons could not. Overlord sat in his command chair and watched the blue planet with cold patience. "Let them eat each other," he said. "When they are weak enough, we will walk in and take what remains." But did not understand humans. He did not know what they could endure. In a small hospital inn, Dr. Hen had not slept in 72 hours. She was a biologist, 34 years old, with tired eyes and steady hands. Before the invasion, she had studied viruses. Now she was trying to create one. They had one weakness that no one had expected. Their respiratory systems were different from humans, designed for a different atmosphere. A disease that would not harm humans at all could be deadly to them. Had been working on this weapon since the 2nd week of the invasion. She had no proper equipment. The aliens had destroyed most of the research centers. She worked with salvaged supplies, broken machines, and knowledge pulled from her memory. "You need to rest," her assistant said, a young man named. "You're going to kill yourself." Shook her head. "Every hour I sleep is an hour they have to kill more of us. I'll rest when this is done." She had said this many times, had stopped arguing. He simply brought her coffee and made sure she ate something at least once a day. On the 73rd hour, found what she was looking for, a simple modification to a common cold virus. It would spread through respiratory systems like fire through dry grass. She held the sample up to the light and smiled for the first time in weeks. Far to the north, in the mountains near the Chinese border, Sergeant Lee was leading his squad through terrain that would have killed weaker men. They had been walking for 3 days, through snow and ice and frozen forests. Half of them were wounded. All of them were starving. Was 41 years old, a career soldier with a face like carved stone. He had 17 soldiers under his command. 3 weeks ago, he had 50. The others had died holding a position against attack, buying time for civilians to escape. Now they needed to reach a supply depot 80 kilometers away. It was their only hope. Sergeant, one of his soldiers, gasped. He was a young man named barely 19 with a bandage around his head that was slowly turning red. "I can't. I need to rest." Stopped and looked at his squad. They were all exhausted, broken, at the end of their strength. They would have stopped here. Their species rested when tired, retreated when wounded. It was logical, it was survival. But was not. "I know you're tired," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I know you're hurt. I know some of you think we're not going to make it, but I need you to listen to me. Every step we take is a victory. Every breath is an act of resistance. The aliens think we're weak because we feel pain. They think we're weak because we bleed. But pain and blood are not weakness. They are proof that we're still fighting." He looked at each of them in turn. "We stop when we're dead, not before. Now move." They moved, fell 3 times in the next kilometer, and 3 times pulled him back up. Another soldier, a woman named, carried 2 rifles because the man next to her could no longer lift his arms. They supported each other through snowdrifts and over frozen rivers. 80 kilometers, 3 days, no food and almost no water. All 17 of them made it. The scout patrol that found them later could not understand what they were seeing. 17 humans, half dead from exhaustion and cold, defending a supply depot against 30 warriors. They should have collapsed. They should have surrendered. Instead, they fought for 6 more hours until reinforcements arrived. All 17 of them survived. On the other side of the world, in what was left of the city of London, an engineer named was performing a miracle with broken tools and impossible odds. Was 29 years old, small and quick, with oil-stained hands and a mind that never stopped working. Before the invasion, she had designed power systems for spacecraft. Now she was trying to rebuild a fusion reactor using parts salvaged from destroyed buildings. The city needed power. Without power, there was no heat. Without heat, people died. They bombed London every few hours, trying to destroy any remaining infrastructure. Worked during the quiet times, then hid in the rubble when the bombs fell. She had been buried alive twice. Both times, she dug herself out and went back to work. "This is impossible," said her assistant, a former university professor named. "We don't have the right components. We don't have proper tools. The mathematics alone would take weeks to calculate." "Then we'll do it without proper mathematics," said. "We'll do it with guesses and hope." She worked for 18 days straight, sleeping in 20-minute intervals, eating whatever she could find. The reactor she built was ugly, held together with welded scrap and prayer. Any proper engineer would have said it could never work. On the 19th day, she pressed the activation switch. The reactor hummed to life. Power flowed through the broken city. Lights came on in shelters that had been dark for months. Heaters began to warm rooms full of freezing refugees. Looked at her creation and laughed. Then she fell asleep right there on the floor, and she did not wake up for 36 hours. Overlord read the reports from Earth with growing confusion. His blockade should have broken the humans by now. They should be starving, dying, begging for mercy. Instead, they were still fighting, still building, still surviving. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They have no supply lines, they have no support. Their cities are in ruins. Why are they not surrendering?" His advisors had no answer. They had conquered many species, and all of them had broken under siege conditions. Without food, without resources, without hope, every species eventually gave up. But humans did not seem to know how to give up. Studied the intelligence reports more carefully. He read about doctors who worked until they collapsed and then woke up and worked more. About soldiers who walked through impossible terrain on broken legs. About engineers who built machines from garbage. About ordinary civilians who shared their last food with strangers. He saw a pattern that he did not understand. When we're hurt, they rested. When they were tired, they stopped. When resources were low, they conserved what they had. It was logical. It was efficient. It was how all intelligent species behaved. Humans did none of these things. They pushed past exhaustion until their bodies simply stopped working. They gave away resources they needed themselves. They kept fighting even when there was no logical chance of victory. It was madness, it was waste, it was completely irrational. And it was winning. For the first time in his long career, felt something cold settle in his stomach. It was not quite fear, not yet, but it was the beginning of fear. Increase the bombardment, he ordered. Double the siege forces, triple them if necessary. But somewhere deep in his mind, a small voice was asking a question he had never asked before. What if they cannot be broken? On Earth, the humans continued to fight. They were hungry, exhausted, and dying. But they did not stop. They did not surrender. They simply refused to accept that they could not win. And slowly, impossibly, they began to turn the tide. 6 months after the invasion began, humanity struck back. Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Indomitable, and looked at the fleet he had built. It was not a beautiful fleet. The ships were ugly things, welded together from cargo vessels, mining equipment, and the wreckage of destroyed warships. They had no elegant curves, no polished surfaces, no proper military design. But they worked, that was all that mattered. Was 53 years old, a veteran of 30 years in the Korean Space Force. He had gray hair, a face, and eyes that had seen too much death. Before the invasion, he had been planning his retirement. Now he was planning the most important battle in human history. How many ships do we have? He asked his first officer, a young woman named 47, Admiral, plus 12 armed transports and about 200 fighter craft. Against how many warships? Our latest count shows 184 in the orbital blockade, another 60 near the moon. Nodded, the numbers were terrible. They would be outnumbered almost 4-1 against ships that were larger, faster, and more heavily armed. Any sensible commander would have waited, built more ships, gathered more resources. But humans were dying every day on the planet below. Every day the blockade continued was another day of starvation, another day of bombardment, another day of death. We attack at dawn, said, send the signal. Far below on Earth, Major received the same signal. She was 40 years old, hard and lean from months of guerrilla warfare. Her uniform was torn and stained. Her face was marked with scars from a plasma blade, but her eyes burned with a fire that had only grown stronger since the invasion began. She gathered her commanders in the basement of a destroyed church. There were 20 of them, representing resistance forces from every continent. Americans, Russians, Chinese, Brazilians, Nigerians. The war had erased old borders. They were all just humans now. The fleet attacks in 12 hours, said. When they engage the in orbit, we hit every enemy position on the ground, simultaneously, everywhere. A Russian commander named spoke up. We don't have enough soldiers for a full assault. We don't have enough weapons. We don't have enough ammunition. I know, said. This is suicide. Probably, looked at each of them. But if we win, we break their hold on Earth forever. If we lose, at least we die fighting instead of starving. Either way, they will learn that humans do not go quietly. There was silence in the room. Then, one by one, the commanders nodded. 12 hours later, the battle began. The human fleet came out of hiding like wolves from the shadows. They had been assembling behind the moon, out of sensor range, for weeks. Now they burst into view with weapons hot and engines at full power. Overlord was sleeping when the alarm came. He stumbled onto his bridge, still half awake, and stared at the tactical display in disbelief. "Where did they get ships?" he demanded. "Our scans showed no significant construction capability." "They must have hidden them, Overlord. Built them in secret, in places we never thought to look." Watched the human fleet approach. The ships were ugly, misshapen things that looked like they might fall apart at any moment. They were slow and poorly armored. His own fleet would destroy them easily. But something about the way they flew made him uneasy. There was no hesitation in their approach, no fear. They came straight at the line like arrows aimed at a target, as if they did not care whether they lived or died. "All ships engage," ordered. "Destroy them." The space battle that followed would be remembered for 1,000 years. They had superior technology, superior numbers, superior everything. Their weapons hit harder, their shields held longer, their ships moved faster. By every measure, they should have won easily. But the humans did not fight by rules. Admiral sent his ships in waves, sacrificing the weakest vessels to draw enemy fire while his stronger ships targeted weapon systems. When a human ship was too damaged to fight, its crew aimed it at the nearest enemy and set the engines to overload. They turned their deaths into weapons. The Indomitable took hit after hit, but refused to retreat. He stood on his bridge as fires burned around him, giving orders in a calm voice even as his ship fell apart. When his main weapons failed, he used secondary weapons. When those failed, he rammed a cruiser and fired every missile in his remaining tubes directly into its hull. Both ships exploded, died with a smile on his face. On Earth, the ground assault was equally brutal. Major led her forces against a fortress outside Seoul. They had no artillery, no air support, no armored vehicles. They had rifles, grenades, and the cold fury of people who had nothing left to lose. The defenders laughed when they saw the human attack coming. It was pathetic, hopeless. The humans were charging fortified positions with nothing but small arms and courage. They stopped laughing when the humans kept coming. The first wave was cut down by plasma fire. The second wave climbed over their bodies and kept advancing. The third wave reached the walls and began throwing grenades. The fourth wave found gaps in the defenses and poured through like water through cracks in a dam. Was in the fifth wave. She fought her way through corridors filled with smoke and screaming, her rifle empty, using a knife she had taken from a dead warrior. She killed 3 aliens with that knife before another human soldier tossed her a fresh weapon. By noon, the fortress was theirs. Similar scenes played out across the planet. Humans attacking positions they could not possibly take, dying by the thousands but never stopping, never retreating, never surrendering. They had never seen anything like it. In orbit, the battle reached its climax. The human fleet was being destroyed ship by ship, but they had taken twice as many vessels with them. The blockade was broken. Supplies were finally reaching Earth. And then something happened that changed everything. Dr. Hand's virus had been spreading through the occupation forces for weeks, carried by the air, by water, by contact. It was a slow weapon, designed to build up in systems before showing any symptoms. Now, in the middle of the battle, warriors began to collapse. On ships and in ground positions, soldiers fell choking and gasping. Their respiratory systems, so different from humans, could not fight off the engineered pathogen. Within hours, 1/3 of the forces on and around Earth were too sick to fight. Overlord received the medical reports with something close to horror. His invincible army was being destroyed by a disease created by a species they had dismissed as primitives. "Overlord," his tactical officer said, his voice shaking, "our forces are requesting permission to withdraw. We cannot hold our positions. Looked at the tactical display. His fleet was crippled. His ground forces were dying from disease and combat. The humans, despite their terrible losses, were still fighting. For the first time in history, an overlord gave an order that had never been given before. All forces said, and his voice was hollow with defeat, retreat. On Earth, the humans watched their enemies flee. They were exhausted, wounded, dying. They had lost millions of people in 6 months of war. Cities were in ruins. Families were destroyed. The cost had been beyond imagination. But they had won. Major stood in the ruins of the fortress, surrounded by the bodies of enemies and friends, and watched the alien climbing toward orbit. She was bleeding from a dozen wounds. She could barely stand. But she was smiling. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." Around her, the survivors began to cheer. It was a ragged sound, more sob than celebration, but it was the sound of victory. The who had never known defeat in 2,000 years had finally found an enemy they could not conquer. And that enemy was human. The fleet fled Earth, but they did not flee far enough. Humanity followed. It was not revenge that drove them, though many wanted revenge. It was not conquest, though they had the momentum for it. It was something else, something that Ambassador understood better than anyone. The galaxy was watching. Was 45 years old, a former diplomat who had spent her career negotiating trade deals and settling border disputes. Small work, safe work. Then the came and everything changed. Now she stood on the bridge of a human warship, part of a fleet that was chasing a retreating enemy across the stars. She wore no uniform, she was not a soldier, but she was perhaps the most important person in the fleet. "We're receiving transmissions," Captain Minyu Song reported. He was the commander of the ship, a young man who had risen fast during the war. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. From who? Everyone, species we've never heard of, worlds the conquered centuries ago. They all want to know the same thing. He paused. They want to know if it's true, if we really defeated the Smile. This was why she had come. "Tell them yes," she said, "and tell them we're coming to help." Across the galaxy, the word spread like fire. They had been defeated, not by a powerful empire, not by an ancient civilization with superior technology, by a small, soft, short-lived species from a blue planet on the galaxy's edge. A species that refused to surrender. On the Overlord faced his council. The great chamber, which had witnessed 2,000 years of victory announcements, now held only shame and fear. "How did this happen?" demanded Counselor, an ancient whose scales had faded to gray. "How did we lose to such weak creatures?" Had spent the entire return journey thinking about this question. He had studied every report, every battle, every moment of the war. He finally had an answer. "They are not weak," he said. "We were wrong about them from the beginning. They have no armor, no claws. Their bodies break under the slightest pressure. How can you say they are not weak?" "Because strength is not only physical," looked at his fellow. "We measure power by size, by weapons, by speed. We always have. But the humans have a different kind of strength, one we never learned to see." He stood and walked to the center of the chamber. "When we are tired, we rest. When we are hurt, we retreat. When we face impossible odds, we calculate our chances and act logically. This is wisdom. This is how all intelligent species behave." His voice grew quieter. "The humans do not behave this way. They fight when they should rest. They advance when they should retreat. They attack when logic says they cannot win. We called this stupidity. We called this madness." He paused. "It is not madness, it is something else. Something we have no word for. They call it willpower, or determination, or simply stubbornness. But whatever it is called, it is stronger than our scales, stronger than our claws, stronger than anything we have ever faced." Counselor made a sound of contempt. "You are saying we should fear these soft creatures." I am saying we already do." The chamber fell silent. It was true, and they all knew it. They who had feared nothing for 2,000 years now looked at humans with something cold in their hearts. Far away, the human fleet reached its destination, space. But they did not come to destroy, they came to liberate. The first world they reached was called by its people. They had conquered it 300 years ago and had stripped it of resources ever since. They were small, gentle beings with large eyes and delicate hands. They had been slaves for so long that most of them had forgotten what freedom felt like. When the human ships appeared in their sky, they were terrified. Another conqueror, another master, another species that would use them and throw them away. Then Ambassador's face appeared on every screen on the planet. "People of," she said, "we are humans from Earth. We have defeated the and we have come to set you free. We want nothing from you. We ask for no tribute, no service, no loyalty. We only want you to know that you are not alone anymore. They can be beaten. Their empire can fall, and any species that fights for its freedom will have humanity as an ally." They wept. They had never heard such words before. Over the following months, the human fleet visited dozens of worlds. Some had been slaves for centuries. Others had been hiding, hopping to escape the Empire's notice. All of them heard the same message. "You are not alone." The Empire began to crumble, not from military defeat, though there was plenty of that, but from something more fundamental: hope. The conquered species began to rise up. Small rebellions became large ones. Slave worlds declared independence. Trade routes were disrupted. Military garrisons were overwhelmed by populations that had finally found the courage to fight. And through it all, the humans were there. Not conquering, not commanding, just helping, teaching, fighting alongside species they had never met before for causes they had no stake in, simply because it was right. On the council made a decision that would have been unthinkable a year before. They asked for peace. Ambassador met with Overlord in a neutral station far from any. They sat across from each other, human, and separated by a table and 2,000 years of very different history. "Your terms?" asked. "Simple," said. "The Dominion will release all conquered species, all of them. You will pay reparations to the worlds you have damaged. You will never again invade another civilization without provocation. And you will join a new galactic council as equals, not masters." Studied her, she was so small, so fragile. He could kill her with one swing of his clawed hand. But he knew, deep in his heart, that killing her would change nothing. There were billions more like her. Billions of soft, stubborn, impossible creatures who would never stop fighting. "And if we refuse?" Smiled, it was not a threatening smile. It was almost sad. "Then we will keep fighting, not just us, everyone you ever conquered, every species you ever enslaved. They know now that you can be beaten. They will never forget. You can kill us, Overlord. You can kill millions of us, but you cannot kill hope, and that is what we have given the galaxy." Was silent for a long time. Then he signed the treaty. It was the first peace treaty in history. The first time they had ever admitted that another species was their equal. When news of the peace reached Earth, the celebrations lasted for weeks. Humans danced in the ruins of their cities. They wept for those they had lost. They held each other and whispered that it was finally over. But Ambassador knew it was not over. It was just the beginning. Because the galaxy had changed. The old order of conquest and domination was dying. Something new was being born. Something built not on strength or fear, but on cooperation and courage. And at the center of it all were the humans. The soft, small, short-lived creatures who had done the impossible. A young child asked her grandmother about the humans. The old woman smiled and told her a story. "Once," she said, "there was an empire that feared nothing. They conquered the stars. They enslaved 100 species. They thought they were invincible. Then they met the humans." "What happened?" the child asked. The humans taught them fear, not with weapons or technology, with something more powerful. They taught them that no matter how strong you are, no matter how many soldiers you have, you cannot defeat a people who refuse to give up. The child thought about this. Are humans scary? The grandmother laughed. To their enemies, yes, to their friends. She looked up at the stars, where human ships had brought freedom to her world. To their friends, they are the greatest hope the galaxy has ever known. Far across the galaxy, on a world called Earth, the sun rose over cities that were slowly being rebuilt. People went back to work, back to school, back to lives that had been interrupted by war. They were still small, still soft, still fragile. But they had proven something that the galaxy would never forget. The humans who feared nothing, not pain, not death, not impossible odds, had taught the universe that true strength has nothing to do with armor or claws or weapons. True strength is the refusal to surrender. And that was something no species could ever take from them.